The millionaire marries the first woman. He met outside his company without knowing her true intentions. He was horrified to discover who she really was. The Miami sun poured over the skyscrapers like liquid gold, reflecting off the windows of the building where Jack Thompson had built his technological empire. From his office on the 30th floor, he gazed at the horizon with a distant look, holding a coffee that had already gone cold between his fingers. At 35 years old, he had achieved everything society considered success: a constantly growing company, recognition in the tech sector, and a bank account that allowed him to live without worries. However, that Friday afternoon, as he reviewed the latest financial reports of his company, Tech Vision Solutions, an inexplicable emptiness weighed on his chest. The numbers on the screen, although promising, seemed to mock him, reminding him that all his professional success had failed to fill that empty space inside. "Mr. Thompson, do you need anything else before I leave?" The voice of his assistant, Sarah, pulled him from his thoughts. She was an efficient woman who had been working with him since the company's beginnings. "No, Sarah, thank you. You can go home," Jack replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy your weekend." When the door closed behind her, Jack loosened his Italian tie and fell back into his leather chair. The walls of his office, decorated with awards and degrees, seemed to close in on him. Each award, each distinction, was a reminder of what he had sacrificed to get here. Meaningful relationships, time with his family, the possibility of building something beyond his company. The latest project he had presented that morning had been a resounding success. The investors were delighted, stocks had gone up, and his team looked at him with admiration. But while everyone celebrated, Jack could only think about how superficial it all felt. The forced smiles, the calculated handshakes, the empty conversations about golf and yachts. It all seemed like an elaborate play in which he was the protagonist of a story he no longer wanted to act out. He got up from his desk and approached the window. Miami stretched out beneath his feet like a carpet of lights and promises. The palm trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, and in the distance the ocean merged with the sky in a blurred horizon. It was the perfect panorama of a perfect life, but Jack could only feel a deep unease. He took out his phone and checked his messages. Invitations to exclusive events, meeting requests, congratulations on the project's success. No personal messages, no real connections. His last attempt at a relationship had ended 6 months ago, when Emily, a marketing executive, told him he was more married to his work than to the possibility of building something meaningful with her. The clock marked 7:30 p.m. Normally, at this time he would be in some luxury restaurant, dining with potential investors or business partners. But tonight the idea of another business dinner made him nauseous. He needed something different, something real. He put some documents in his leather briefcase, more out of habit than necessity, and turned off his computer. As he left his office, the hallways were deserted, only illuminated by emergency lights. The sound of his Italian shoes against the marble echoed in the emptiness, like an echo of his loneliness. In the elevator, his reflection in the mirror returned an image he barely recognized: a successful man, impeccably dressed, but with a dull look that betrayed his emotional exhaustion. He ran his hand through his perfectly combed hair, messing it up slightly, as a small act of rebellion against his own image. As he left the building, instead of heading to his Tesla Model S parked in the spot reserved for the CEO, Jack decided to walk. Miami's humid air enveloped him like an uncomfortable but welcome embrace. The streets were full of life, couples walking hand in hand, groups of friends laughing, tourists marveling at the city. Everyone seemed to have a purpose, a connection, something that eluded him. After walking a few blocks, his steps led him to a bar he had never noticed before. It wasn't the type of establishment he frequented. No trendy electronic music, no designer-clad waiters, no cocktails with pretentious names. It was a simple place with a neon sign that blinked softly: Pete's Corner. For the first time that day, Jack felt he had found exactly what he needed. Without thinking twice, he pushed the door and entered, leaving behind the noise of the city and its pretensions. The cozy atmosphere and dim light welcomed him, but what really caught his attention was the solitary figure sitting at the bar, a dark-haired woman who seemed as out of place as he was. The interior of the bar was a cozy refuge from the outside world, with exposed brick walls, and black and white photographs that told silent stories of other times. Jack loosened his tie even more and headed towards the bar, choosing to sit 2 stools away from the mysterious woman who had caught his attention. "A whiskey neat, please," he asked the bartender, an older man with a graying mustache who nodded without saying a word. As he waited for his drink, Jack couldn't help but cast discreet glances to his right. The woman was holding a glass of red wine between her elegant fingers, gently swirling it as she seemed lost in thought. There was something about her that stood out from the bar's atmosphere. Just like himself, her black dress was simple but obviously designer, and her posture denoted a natural elegance that contrasted with the rusticity of the place. However, she seemed perfectly comfortable in this environment, as if she had found her own refuge from the outside world. Also escaping from expectations? The question left Jack's lips before he could think better of it. The woman slowly turned towards him, and for the first time he could see her full face. Her eyes, a deep honey color, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and amusement. "Is it that obvious?" she responded with an enigmatic smile. Her voice had a slight accent that Jack couldn't identify, something that made her English even more intriguing. "Let's say I recognize the symptoms." Jack found himself smiling genuinely for the first time that day. "I'm Jack." "Olivia," she replied, studying him with a look that seemed to see beyond his successful businessman facade. "And what expectations are you escaping from, Jack?" There was something in her way of asking that invited honesty. Jack found himself moving 1 stool closer, his whiskey momentarily forgotten on the bar. "All of them, I suppose. Success, image, being who everyone expects me to be." The words came out with a sincerity that surprised him. "And you?" Olivia took a sip of her wine before answering. "My past mainly, and perhaps myself." Her answer was cryptic, but her tone suggested there was much more behind those words. The conversation flowed naturally from that moment. They talked about everything and nothing, the jazz music playing softly in the background, their favorite places in Miami, books and movies. Olivia had a unique way of seeing the world, a perspective that mixed cynicism and hope in perfect proportions. "You know, it's refreshing to talk to someone who isn't trying to impress or sell something," Jack commented after an hour of conversation. "How do you know I'm not trying to impress you?" she replied with a playful glint in her eyes. "I could be a master of deception." "If you are, then you're the best I've met," Jack joked, though something in his tone suggested that the possibility intrigued him more than it worried him. As the night progressed, Jack noticed small details about her. The way she played with a ring on her index finger when she was thoughtful, how her eyes lit up when she talked about art, the way she subtly evaded questions about her work or her family. Each detail only increased his fascination. "Would you like to take a walk?" Olivia suddenly proposed, looking at her watch. "I know a place nearby with an incredible view of the city." Jack looked at his own watch, surprised to see it was almost 11. The hours had flown by in her company. "I'd love to," he replied, leaving a couple of bills on the bar. They left together into the Miami night, which had taken on a different air during their time in the bar. The streets were still full of life, but now they seemed friendlier, less alienating. They walked side by side, their steps naturally synchronizing as Olivia guided him through less busy side streets. "Do you trust following a stranger in the middle of the night?" she asked, half jokingly, half seriously. "There's something about you that tells me you're worth the risk," Jack replied, surprised by his own audacity. Olivia looked at him sideways, an indescribable expression crossing her face for an instant. "Trust can be dangerous, Jack. Sometimes people aren't what they seem." "Is that a warning or a confession?" "Take it as advice from a stranger who could become something more," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They arrived at a small elevated park that offered a panoramic view of Miami Bay. The city lights reflected on the water like fallen stars, and the sea breeze brought with it promises of new possibilities. "This is my secret place," said Olivia, leaning on the railing. "I come here when I need to remember there's more to life than our small daily worries." Jack stood next to her, aware of the electricity that seemed to vibrate in the space between them. "And do you come here often?" "Only when I find someone worth sharing it with," she replied, turning to look at him directly. At that moment, under the city lights and with the distant sound of the waves, Jack felt that something fundamental was changing in his life. He didn't know if it was the beginning of something wonderful or dangerous, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. The following weeks passed like a dream for Jack. He dedicated every free moment to Olivia, who seemed to have the gift of making the world around her transform into something more vibrant, more intense. Their encounters, at first casual, became increasingly frequent, as if a magnetic force inevitably attracted them to each other. During the day, Jack found himself distracted in important meetings, remembering details of his conversations with Olivia. The way she wrinkled her nose when she laughed, the hypnotic movement of her hands when talking about art, the way her perfume lingered in the air even after she had gone. His company, once the center of his universe, began to seem secondary compared to the moments they shared together. "You're different," Sarah commented one morning as she handed him the day's reports. "There's something about you that has changed." Jack smiled, aware that his assistant was right. He was no longer the same man who was drowning in his own success. The perfectly knotted ties had given way to looser collars, and business dinners had been replaced by improvised adventures with Olivia in small restaurants he would never have discovered on his own. One afternoon, while sharing a coffee on a small terrace overlooking the ocean, Olivia casually mentioned that her temporary apartment lease was about to end. Jack, without thinking twice, proposed that she move in with him. "Don't you think it's too soon?" she asked, studying him with those eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Olivia remained silent for a moment, playing with the ring on her index finger, that gesture that Jack had learned to recognize as a sign that she was considering something important. "All right," she finally said, "but on one condition, let's keep it private for now." "I don't like complications." Jack accepted without questioning her, although a small voice inside wondered why so much mystery. But that voice was quickly silenced by the excitement of having her closer. The move was surprisingly simple. Olivia arrived with just 2 suitcases and some personal items. "I like to travel light," she explained when Jack commented on how little she was bringing. "Material possessions are just anchors that tie us down." As they spent more time together, Jack began to notice small inconsistencies in Olivia's stories. Sometimes she mentioned having grown up in London, other times in Sydney. Her anecdotes about her family were vague and changing, as if she were improvising on the spot. But there was something in her way of telling stories that made even the contradictions seem fascinating. One night, as they were having dinner on the balcony of his apartment, Olivia's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her face changed for an instant, a shadow crossing her features before rejecting the call. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noticing her unease. "Yes, just spam," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, we should take a trip together, get away from everything for a few days." The suggestion took Jack by surprise, but the idea was tempting. "Do you have any place in mind?" "I've always wanted to see the beaches of the Florida Keys," she said, leaning forward enthusiastically. "We could drive down to Key West, stay in small hotels along the way, be different people for a few days." The way she said, "be different people," resonated strangely in Jack's ears, but he ignored it. "Sounds perfect. I can take a few days off next week. What if we make it more interesting?" Olivia proposed, her eyes shining with that sparkle that Jack had learned to associate with her most adventurous ideas. "No phones, no connections to the outside world, just you and me." The proposal should have alarmed him, especially considering his responsibilities at the company, but instead, it excited him. "You know what? Let's do it. The world can survive without us for a few days." Olivia smiled, satisfied, and got up to pour more wine. As he watched her move around the apartment with the familiarity of someone who had lived there all her life, Jack wondered how he had managed to exist before without her in his life. However, that night, while Olivia slept, Jack couldn't help but notice her phone lighting up repeatedly with silent messages. Curiosity was eating at him, but he respected her privacy, although something inside warned him that there was more to Olivia than met the eye. At the office, his friends and colleagues began to notice changes in his behavior. Decisions he used to make with calculated precision now seemed more impulsive, more emotional. "You're different, man," his best friend Mike commented during lunch. "Is there something I should know?" Jack considered telling him about Olivia, about how she had transformed his life in a matter of weeks, but he remembered his promise of discretion. "I'm just learning to live a little more, Mike. Sometimes change is good." What Jack didn't know was that every time he protected Olivia's secrets, Every time he chose blind trust over prudence, he was weaving his own web from which it would soon be impossible to escape. The sweetest poison is that which is taken voluntarily, and Jack was drinking every drop with pleasure. The trip to the Keys turned out to be a turning point in Jack and Olivia's relationship. For 5 days, they lived in a bubble of seemingly perfect happiness, away from the outside world. The small inns by the sea became the backdrop for their love story, each sunset more intense than the last. However, it was during that same getaway that Jack began to notice details that, in retrospect, should have alerted him. One afternoon, as they walked along a deserted beach, they crossed paths with a couple of tourists who seemed to recognize Olivia. The woman stared at her and began to say something, but Olivia reacted quickly, taking Jack's arm and guiding him in the opposite direction. "Did you know them?" Jack asked, intrigued by her reaction. "No, but there are people who confuse you with someone else and won't leave you alone," she replied with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Hasn't that happened to you?" Back in Miami, life together took on a routine that was almost perfect for Jack. Olivia had transformed his apartment, once cold and minimalist, into a space full of life. Small details appeared mysteriously: contemporary artwork, books in languages he didn't know, peculiar objects she said she had collected on her travels. One morning, while Olivia was sleeping, Jack found a passport that had fallen behind the dresser. When he opened it, he noticed it was in the name of Isabella Martinez. The photographs were too faded to distinguish the face well, but something about them seemed familiar. When he asked Olivia about it, she dismissed it naturally. "Oh, it must be from the previous tenant of my apartment. I found it when I was packing and forgot to return it. I'll take care of sending it to the embassy." Jack nodded, although an uncomfortable feeling settled in his stomach. It was the first time she had mentioned this supposed previous tenant. At the office, Tech Vision Solutions continued to thrive, but Jack had begun to delegate more responsibilities. His employees murmured about the changes in his behavior: late arrivals, early departures, important decisions postponed for impromptu plans with his mysterious girlfriend. "Jack, we need to talk," Mike said one afternoon, closing the office door behind him. "As your friend and as your chief legal advisor, I'm concerned." "Concerned about what?" Jack leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain a casual tone. "About you, about the company, about this woman you barely talk about, but who is clearly changing your whole life. Did you know that someone has been accessing the company's servers from unauthorized locations?" Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had given Olivia access to his personal computer several times when she showed interest in his work. "Must be system errors," he replied, though without much conviction. "Jack, I've known you since college. I've never seen you like this. So different. Who is she really?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and heavy. Jack found himself defending Olivia with more vehemence than necessary, speaking of her intelligence, her creativity, her unique way of seeing the world. But as the words left his mouth, a part of him realized how little he really knew about her. That night, when he got home, he found Olivia working on her laptop on the balcony. She looked beautiful under the sunset light, but something in her intense concentration, in the way she quickly closed the screen when she saw him, caused an unease he couldn't ignore. "Productive day?" she asked, getting up to kiss him. "Interesting," he replied, studying her face. Mike mentioned something about strange accesses to the company's servers. For a microsecond, something changed in Olivia's expression, so fast that Jack almost imagined it. "Oh, how strange. Do you think they might be trying to hack them?" "It's possible," said Jack, noticing how she subtly diverted the conversation to other topics. During dinner, Olivia seemed more animated than usual, talking about a project she had been developing, an idea that could revolutionize the tech market. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she explained concepts that, surprisingly, demonstrated a deep knowledge of the sector. "Where did you learn so much about technology?" Jack asked, genuinely impressed. "Oh, you learn many things when you travel as much as I do," she replied vaguely. "Jack, I've been thinking, have you considered expanding Tech Vision into international markets?" The question seemed casual, but something in her tone suggested a deeper interest. Jack remembered Mike's words, the concern in his eyes. "Actually, yes," he replied cautiously. "We have some projects in development." "We should work together," Olivia suggested, leaning forward intensely. "I have contacts, experience in international markets. We could do great things together, Jack. The proposal was tempting, like everything that came from her. But for the first time, Jack felt an inner resistance, a voice warning him to maintain some professional distance. "It's an interesting idea," he finally said, "but I'd need to think it over carefully. The company is my responsibility." Olivia smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Of course, my love. Take your time. After all, trust is the foundation of any relationship, don't you think?" That night, as Olivia slept, Jack found himself staring at the ceiling, reviewing every detail of the past few months. The inconsistencies in her stories, the mysterious calls, her surprisingly specific knowledge of his industry. It all formed a pattern he refused to see clearly, like signals in the fog warning of a danger his heart refused to acknowledge. Olivia's proposal for a professional collaboration didn't hang in the air for long. Over the next few weeks, she subtly introduced the topic into their conversations, always finding opportune moments to demonstrate her knowledge of the tech market and Tech Vision Solutions operations. One night, as they shared a bottle of wine on their favorite terrace, Olivia unveiled her full vision. "I've been developing a detailed plan," she said, taking out a tablet from her bag. "Look at this." Jack leaned towards the screen, genuinely impressed by what he saw. It was an exhaustive analysis of Tech Vision's expansion possibilities in emerging markets, with financial projections, risk analyses, and implementation strategies that seemed incredibly well thought out. "When did you have time to prepare all this?" he asked, amazed by the level of detail. "Let's say I have experience in this type of project," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "Jack, we could do something truly extraordinary together. Your technological vision and my international connections, we'd be unstoppable." The idea was tempting, especially because Jack had been considering international expansion for years. However, something in the precision of Olivia's analysis disturbed him. How had she obtained such detailed information about his company's internal operations? "It's impressive," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "But I'd need to consult with the management team, especially with Mike." The mention of Mike provoked an almost imperceptible change in Olivia's expression. "Mike? The same one who's been questioning the server accesses." "Jack, my love, don't you think sometimes excessive caution can become an obstacle to progress?" "It's his job to be cautious," Jack defended. "He's our legal advisor. And mine is to show you the opportunities you're missing," she responded, moving closer. "You know what the problem is with successful entrepreneurs like you? They become too cautious, too tied to their comfort zones." Her words touched a sensitive point in Jack. Wasn't it that same caution that had been suffocating him before he met her? "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked, feeling he was about to cross an important threshold. "Simple. Make me your partner. Give me full access to the company's operations. I can prove my value in weeks." The proposal hung in the air like a storm cloud. Jack took a long sip of wine, buying time to think. "Olivia, it's not that simple. There are procedures, protocols." "Procedures?" she interrupted with a soft laugh. "Jack, procedures are for people who don't dare to take risks. Did you build your company by following the manual?" Before Jack could respond, Olivia's phone vibrated. She looked at it quickly and silenced it, but not before Jack noticed a name on the screen. G. It wasn't the first time he had seen calls from this mysterious contact. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Perfect," she replied, putting the phone away. "Where were we?" "Ah, yes. Jack, let's be honest. Your company needs a radical change to maintain its position in the market. Competitors are advancing, technology is evolving. How long do you think you can maintain the status quo?" Jack felt the weight of her words. It was true that competition had become fiercer in recent months, and the projections Olivia had shown were promising. "Let's do something," she proposed, noticing his indecision. "Give me limited access for a month. I'll show you concrete results. If you're not convinced, everything goes back to how it was before." "What about Mike? The board of directors? Do you really need their approval for every decision you make? It's your company, Jack. You built it from scratch. Don't you trust your own judgment?" Olivia's words resonated in his mind, mixing with memories of all the times his instinct had led him to success against all odds and advice. "Besides," she continued, her voice softening, "isn't this also about us? About building something together, creating a shared future?" Jack looked at her, lost in those eyes that seemed to contain promises of a bright future. But somewhere in his mind, a small and persistent voice reminded him of all the inconsistencies, the mysterious calls, the details that didn't add up. "I need time to think about it," he finally said. "Of course," Olivia replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But not too long. Opportunities like love don't wait forever." That night, as Olivia slept, Jack received a message from Mike. "We need to talk. It's urgent. I found something about O." Jack looked at Olivia sleeping, so beautiful and apparently vulnerable in the dim light. How could something that felt so right generate so many doubts? He replied to Mike that they would meet the next day, aware that he was at a crossroads that could change his life forever. The next morning dawned grey and humid, as if Miami sensed the storm that was approaching in Jack's life. He had slept little, alternating between watching Olivia sleep and obsessively reviewing Mike's message. When he left the apartment, she was still asleep, or at least she appeared to be. The cafe where he agreed to meet Mike was several blocks from the office, a discreet place they frequented little. Upon arriving, he found his friend already seated at a table in the back, with a manila folder in front of him, and an expression Jack had never seen before. "Thanks for coming," Mike said as Jack sat down. "Did you make sure no one followed you?" Jack almost laughed at the question, but the seriousness on his friend's face stopped him. "Mike, what's going on?" Mike carefully opened the folder, revealing several photographs and documents. "Before I show you this, I need you to promise me that you'll listen to me until the end, no matter what you see. You're scaring me." "You should be scared," Mike replied, sliding the first photograph towards him. "Do you recognize anyone?" Jack took the image and felt the air leave his lungs. It was Olivia, but not exactly as he knew her. Her hair was different, shorter and blonde, and she was going by the name Isabella Martinez. She was at what appeared to be a corporate gala, on the arm of a businessman Jack recognized as the CEO of a major tech company in California. This was 2 years ago, Mike explained. 3 months later, the company suffered a massive cyber attack that compromised all their data. The CEO was forced to resign when it was discovered that someone had been accessing confidential information from his personal account. Before Jack could process this information, Mike slid another photograph. This time, Olivia appeared as Andrea Torres at a technology conference in Singapore, next to another high-level executive. "The pattern is always the same," Mike continued. "She approaches executives of tech companies, establishes a personal relationship, gains their trust, and then—" "Enough," Jack interrupted, but his friend continued implacably. "The calls she receives. Have you noticed they're always from the same contact? Gee, it's Gabriel Vega, a well-known cybersecurity consultant. Or at least that's what he appears to be." Jack remembered all the mysterious calls, the interrupted conversations, the vague explanations. "How did you get all this information?" "I hired a private investigator when I started noticing the strange accesses to our servers." "Jack, she's not who she says she is. She's part of a sophisticated corporate espionage operation." The words hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. Images of the past few months flashed through his mind, the passport he found, the inconsistent stories, her detailed knowledge of the industry. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because our systems detected a massive access attempt to the main servers last night. Someone is trying to copy all our intellectual property, all our trade secrets, and the IP addresses. Some match the laptop you gave her for her birthday." Jack remembered that moment, how Olivia had insisted on a specific brand and model, how she had seemed so excited to receive it. "Oh my God," he muttered, running his hands over his face. "There's more," Mike said, pulling out more documents. "And we found suspicious bank transfers, small amounts at first, then larger ones, all to offshore accounts. Have you given her access to the company's accounts?" "Not exactly, but—" Jack stopped, remembering all the times he had left his computer unlocked at home, the seemingly innocent questions about the company's operations, the moments he had found her working on her laptop late at night. "Jack, I know this is hard to accept, but we need to act fast. If she realizes we've discovered her—" At that moment, Jack's phone vibrated with a message from Olivia. "Where are you, love? I woke up and you weren't here. I have big news about our project." Jack felt nauseous reading the message. How many other people had received similar messages? How many others had fallen into the same trap? "What do you suggest I do?" he asked, feeling more lost than ever. "For now, act normal. We've alerted the relevant authorities, but we need solid evidence. And Jack, Don't allow her access to anything else from the company. Not even your personal phone. As he got up to leave, Jack noticed something else in the folder. A photo of Olivia with Gabriel Vega, taken just a week before at a Miami restaurant. The intimacy between them was evident, and the expression on Olivia's face was one he had never seen. Cold, calculating, professional. "One last thing," Mike said. "Be careful. These people, they're professionals. Don't make the mistake of underestimating them because of your feelings." Jack nodded mechanically and left the cafe, feeling that the world around him was crumbling. His phone vibrated again with another message from Olivia. "Is everything okay? I miss you. We need to talk about the future." The future. Jack looked at the message as he walked in the rain that had begun to fall, wondering how something that seemed so real, so special, could have been an elaborate lie from the beginning. The return to the apartment was the longest journey of Jack's life. Each step was an internal debate, each traffic light a pause to reorganize his thoughts. The rain had soaked his suit, but he barely noticed. His mind was replaying every moment with Olivia on a loop, now tinged with the colors of suspicion and betrayal. As he opened the door, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted him, along with the image of Olivia in the kitchen, dressed in one of his shirts so domestic and familiar that for a moment Jack doubted everything Mike had shown him. "Finally," she exclaimed, approaching to kiss him. "I was worried. Why didn't you answer my messages?" Jack forced himself to smile, aware that every gesture of his had to appear natural. "Early meeting with investors. You know how they are. No phones allowed." Olivia studied him for a moment, her eyes scanning his face with an intensity that before would have seemed adorable, but that he now recognized as calculating. "You're soaked. Why don't you take a hot shower while I prepare breakfast? I have something important to discuss with you." In the shower, Jack let the hot water fall over him, trying to clear his thoughts. How much would she know? Would she suspect that he was aware of her true identity? Mike's words resonated in his mind. They're professionals. When he came out of the bathroom, he found Olivia sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open and several documents spread out on the surface. She had changed, now wearing an elegant outfit that reminded him of the photo with the California executive. "I've been working on something exciting," she said, her eyes shining with that enthusiasm that had captivated him before. "Remember our conversation about international expansion?" Jack sat across from her, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "How could I forget? Well, I've developed a complete proposal. Look at this." She turned the laptop towards him, showing an elaborate presentation. "I've identified 3 key markets where Tech Vision could establish itself immediately. I already have contacts in each of them. We just need full access to our systems," Jack completed, keeping his voice neutral. "Exactly," she smiled, apparently pleased with his understanding. "It's the next logical step, love. We can't expand effectively without a total integration of the systems." Jack took a sip of coffee, buying time. He studied the woman in front of him, looking for traces of the Olivia he had fallen in love with. Had it all been an act from the beginning? "What do you think?" she asked, leaning forward in anticipation. "It's impressive," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "But I have some questions. For example, how did you get such detailed information about our internal systems?" For a fraction of a second, something changed in Olivia's expression, so fast that anyone not watching her carefully would have missed it. "I've been studying the company since we met, love. You know how meticulous I am." "Yes, I know," said Jack, thinking about the other companies she had studied. "I was also wondering about your contacts. How exactly did you get them?" Olivia stood up, circling the kitchen island to stand behind him. She began to massage his shoulders, a gesture that used to calm him but now gave him chills. "Years of networking, connections from my time in consulting. Why so many questions, love? Don't you trust me?" The irony of the question almost made him laugh. "Of course I trust you," he lied, covering one of her hands with his. "I just want to understand the whole process better." "Perfect," she purred in his ear, "because I need you to sign some documents today. They're just legal formalities to start the integration process." Jack felt his heart rate accelerate. "Today? Why the rush?" "The market doesn't wait, love. We have a unique window of opportunity." She separated from him and began to take more documents out of her briefcase. "Besides, I have a surprise for you. Remember you mentioned wanting to know more about my past? Jack held his breath. Yes, I remember. Well, I've arranged a dinner for tonight. I want you to meet someone very special to me, someone who has been like a mentor. She smiled as she handed him the documents. Gabriel is eager to meet you. The name fell like a bomb in the room. Jack maintained his neutral expression as he leafed through the papers, aware that his every move was being evaluated. It will be a pleasure to meet him, he replied, forcing a smile. What time is dinner? At 8 at LeBlanc. Olivia began to gather her things. I have to go out for a few hours, last details to arrange. Shall we meet there directly? Jack nodded, watching as she prepared to leave. Before going, Olivia stopped at the door. Jack, love, this is the beginning of something big for us. I can feel it. When the door closed behind her, Jack remained motionless for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Then, with trembling hands, he took out his phone and dialed Mike's number. We have a problem, he said as soon as his friend answered. The dinner is tonight, and Gabriel Vega will be there. LeBlanc shimmered like a jewel in the Miami night, its crystal windows reflecting the city lights. Jack arrived deliberately early, following Mike's advice. We need to control the environment as much as possible, his friend had told him during their emergency meeting that afternoon. The maître led him to a strategically located table with a view of both the entrance and the emergency exits. Jack had specifically chosen this location, another suggestion from Mike. Don't give them unnecessary advantages, his words resonated in his mind. While waiting, he mentally reviewed the plan. The authorities were aware of the situation, discreetly monitoring the meeting. Mike had insisted on having a security team on standby, but Jack had refused. If they're as professional as you say, they'll notice immediately, he had argued. At 8 o'clock sharp, Olivia appeared at the restaurant entrance. She wore a black dress that reminded Jack of their first encounter at the bar. She looked absolutely stunning, and for a moment Jack's heart painfully contracted. How could something so beautiful be so false? Love, she smiled, leaning in to kiss him. Her perfume, the same she had worn for months, now seemed to him another tool in her elaborate deception. Gabriel will arrive any moment. You're a bit tense. Is everything okay? Perfectly, Jack replied, raising his wine glass. Just anxious to finally meet your mentor. Olivia studied him for a moment, and Jack wondered if she had noticed something in his tone. But before he could say anything more, a familiar figure appeared at the restaurant entrance. Gabriel Vega, in person, was even more imposing than in the photographs Mike had shown him. Tall, elegant, with the kind of presence that immediately filled a room. He approached their table with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Finally, we meet, Gabriel exclaimed, extending his hand to Jack. His handshake was firm, professional, his eyes assessing every detail. Olivia has told me a lot about you. Curious, Jack replied, maintaining eye contact. She's barely mentioned you. And tense silence settled at the table, broken by the arrival of the sommelier. Gabriel took control of the situation, ordering a bottle of wine with the familiarity of a connoisseur. Jack runs a fascinating company, Gabriel commented as the wine was being served. Tech Vision Solutions is doing very interesting things in the field of digital security, isn't it? Quite interesting, Jack confirmed, noticing how Olivia and Gabriel exchanged a quick glance. Although I imagine you already know that. Gabriel smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Why do you say that? Simple professional curiosity. After all, you're an expert in cybersecurity, aren't you? The tension at the table noticeably increased. Olivia intervened, her voice deliberately light. Jack, love, didn't you tell me you had exciting news about the international expansion? Ah, yes, Jack replied, taking a sip of wine, although I wonder if Gabriel is already aware of those plans. He seems to be very well informed about everything related to Tech Vision. Jack? Olivia's voice had an edge of warning he had never heard before. What are you insinuating? I'm not insinuating anything, he replied, keeping his voice casual. I just find it fascinating how coincidences accumulate. Your sudden interest in my company, your detailed knowledge of our systems, the mysterious calls. He looked directly at Gabriel. The G contact on your phone. The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. Gabriel's mask of cordiality hardened, while Olivia remained perfectly still like a predator preparing to pounce. I see you've been doing your homework, Gabriel commented, his tone now completely professional. Impressive. Most don't connect the dots so quickly. Most? You mean the other executives, like the CEO in California? Or the one in Singapore? Olivia put down her wine glass with a soft but definitive thud. Have you been investigating me? Isn't that what you've been doing to me from the beginning? Jack replied, surprised by the calmness in his own voice. Business is business, Jack, Gabriel intervened, his tone almost paternal. There's nothing personal in this. Nothing personal? Jack let out a bitter laugh. Living in my house for months? Building an entire relationship based on lies? Is that not personal? It was necessary, Olivia replied, and for the first time Jack saw the true woman behind the facade. Her eyes no longer showed the warmth he had grown accustomed to, but a professional coldness that chilled him. You're smarter than this, Jack. You know how the corporate world works. What I know, said Jack, leaning forward, is that you underestimated the wrong person. A flash of alarm crossed Gabriel's face. What do you mean? Did you really think you could access our system so easily without us noticing, without leaving traces? Every access, every infiltration attempt, every transfers, it was all recorded. Olivia and Gabriel exchanged another look, this time loaded with real concern. Gabriel's mask of control was beginning to show cracks. Jack, Olivia began, her voice now soft, almost like the woman he had fallen in love with. We can come to an agreement. You don't have to make this more difficult than necessary. An agreement? Jack slowly rose from his chair. I think this dinner is over. And by the way, the authorities have all the information. Every detail, every operation, every false identity. As he walked away from the table, he heard Olivia's voice one last time. Jack, wait. But he kept walking, aware that each step was taking him away not only from her, but from the months of lies he had lived. Outside, the Miami night greeted him with its characteristic warmth, but for the first time in a long time, Jack could breathe freely. The night had transformed into a surreal sequence of events for Jack. After leaving the restaurant, he walked aimlessly through the streets of Miami, his mind replaying every detail of the confrontation. The city's humid air failed to dissipate the weight he felt in his chest, a mixture of relief and pain that threatened to drown him. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages and calls from Olivia, each notification like a small reminder of the reality he had just unmasked. Finally, he turned it off, preferring silence to the explanations she might try to give. When he arrived at his apartment, he paused in the lobby, aware that the place he had considered his home for the past few months was now contaminated by lies. The doorman greeted him with a worried expression. Mr. Thompson, Miss Olivia was here a few minutes ago. She seemed quite upset. She insisted on going up, but we followed your instructions not to allow access to anyone without your express authorization. Jack nodded, grateful for having taken that precaution before going to dinner. Thank you, Frank. If she returns, maintain the same instructions. As he entered his apartment, the impact of what had happened hit him with full force. Every corner held memories of moments that now revealed themselves as carefully orchestrated. The artwork Olivia had brought, the books they shared, even the scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, all formed part of an elaborate production designed to manipulate him. His office phone, the only one he had kept on, rang with a message from Mike. The systems detected massive access attempts. They're desperate. Are you safe in your apartment? Before he could respond, he noticed something different in his study. The door, which he always kept closed, was slightly ajar. With his heart racing, he entered the room. His desk showed signs that someone had been hastily searching for something. The folders were in disarray, and his backup laptop wasn't where he had left it. A noise in the living room alerted him. As he turned, he found himself face to face with Olivia. There was nothing left of the vulnerable woman he had met at the bar. Her posture, her gaze, everything about her screamed professional. We need to talk, she said, her voice controlled but tense. How did you get in? Does it really matter? She took a step towards him. Jack, things don't have to end badly. We can find a solution that benefits everyone. A solution? Jack let out a humorless laugh. Like what happened to the CEO in California or in Singapore. Those were different. They didn't understand the opportunities we were offering them. Olivia moved around the room with the grace of a feline. You're different. Smarter, more special. Special. Jack kept his distance, aware of her every move. Is that what you tell everyone? A flash of something. Pain, irritation, crossed Olivia's face. Not everyone deserved the effort I dedicated to you. These months, not everything was a lie. What part was real? The made-up stories about your past, the feigned feelings, or perhaps the plans to steal everything I've worked for? Olivia stopped, studying him with an intensity that had once captivated him, but now only provoked rejection. The corporate world is a war, Jack. We just play by the unwritten rules. We? You and Gabriel? Jack noticed how she tensed at the mention of the name. Or are there more people involved in your little theater? That doesn't matter now. What matters is that we can still fix this. The information your systems have, we could erase it, make it as if nothing had happened. And I suppose we would also erase the last few months of my life? The lies, the manipulations, the betrayal? For the first time, Olivia seemed genuinely affected by his words. Not everything was a lie? Jack interrupted her. You know what's the saddest thing? That a part of me still wants to believe there was something real in all of this. Some moment, some conversation, some feeling that wasn't calculated and false. A heavy silence fell between them. In the distance, the sound of the city seemed to mock the intimacy of the moment. You're right, Olivia finally said, her voice softer. Not everything was calculated. There are things that can't be faked, Jack. Moments that... The sound of her phone interrupted her. Jack saw the now familiar G on the screen before she silenced it. He doesn't know you're here, does he? Jack asked, the pieces fitting in his mind. This isn't part of the plan. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, as if she were memorizing his features. Sometimes the best plans get complicated with real feelings. Before Jack could respond, she headed towards the door. On the threshold, she stopped and looked at him one last time. I'm sorry, Jack. For everything. And with that, she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps and the lingering scent of her perfume. Jack stood motionless, aware that he had just witnessed perhaps the only moment of real honesty in his relationship with Olivia. The morning after the encounter with Olivia, Jack found himself in his office before dawn, watching Miami wake up from his window. The city seemed different, as if the veil of illusion had been lifted not only from his personal life, but from everything around him. Mike entered without announcing himself, carrying a cup of coffee and a worried expression. You haven't slept, have you? How could I? Jack turned to his friend. After she left last night, I checked every corner of the apartment. I found listening devices in my study, spyware on my backup computer, even a detailed record of all my passwords and daily routines. She was more professional than we thought, Mike muttered, setting the coffee on the desk. But they made a crucial mistake. They underestimated you. Jack took a sip of coffee, grateful for the warmth and caffeine. No, Mike. Their mistake was that she began to feel something real. Before Mike could respond, Sarah rushed into the office. Mr. Thompson, you have to see this. She turned on the wall TV, tuning to a financial news channel. On the screen, a presenter was speaking urgently. In a surprising turn of events, multiple tech companies have reported attempts to infiltrate their systems this morning. Authorities have established connections between these incidents and a sophisticated corporate espionage network. Experts suggest these operations may have been active for years. They're desperate, Mike commented. With their plans exposed, they're trying to extract as much information as possible before disappearing. Jack's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I need to see you. It's about Gabriel. Oh, you're not going, are you? Mike asked, reading the concern on his friend's face. I have to, Jack replied, already putting on his jacket. There's something bigger here, I can feel it. At least let the security team... No, this is between her and me. The meeting place was the same elevated park where Olivia had taken him that first night. He found her leaning on the railing, looking out over the bay. She was dressed simply, without the elaborate glamour he had become accustomed to. Gabriel lost control, she said without turning around. What you're seeing on the news, that wasn't part of the plan. And what exactly was the plan? A clean extraction. Get in, obtain the necessary information, get out without leaving traces. She finally turned to look at him. But Gabriel, he always wants more. More information, more money, more power. Why are you telling me this? Because I made a mistake, Jack, not in falling in love with you. That was probably the only right thing in all of this. My mistake was believing I could maintain control of the situation. Jack studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, but found only exhaustion and what seemed like sincere regret. Gabriel doesn't work alone, she continued. There are powerful people behind all this, people who don't accept failure. When they find out we've been discovered, are you in danger? A sad smile appeared on her face. You still care about me after everything I did? I shouldn't, but here we are. I need your help, Jack, not for me, but to stop something bigger. I have information, documents that prove connections with people you'd never imagine involved in this. Why should I trust you? Because this time, I have nothing to gain by lying. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket. Everything is here. Every operation, every target, every conspiracy I've been part of, including the real plan for Tech Vision. Jack looked at the device, aware of the weight of the decision he was facing. What will happen to you? I'll disappear. It's what I do best, isn't it? Her attempt at a joke sounded hollow. But first, I need to know that this information will reach the right people. At that moment, Olivia's phone rang. Seeing the screen, her face paled. It's him. He must know I'm here. Come with me. The words left Jack's mouth before he could think them through. We can protect you. Do things the right way. For a moment, he saw doubt in her eyes, a crack in her professional facade. But then, as so many times before, the mask slipped back into place. Some of us don't have the luxury of redemption, Jack. She handed him the USB drive and, without warning, kissed him softly. I'm sorry. For everything. Before he could stop her, she quickly walked away, losing herself in the crowd that was beginning to fill the park. Jack stood watching the spot where she had disappeared, the USB device weighing in his hand like a tangible reminder that sometimes the truth comes at too high a price. The following days turned into a whirlwind of revelations. Jack, Mike, and a small team of trusted individuals locked themselves in a secure room at Tech Vision to analyze the information Olivia had provided. Each file they opened was like lifting a rock and finding a nest of snakes underneath. This is bigger than we imagined, Mike muttered, his tired eyes fixed on the screen. It's not just tech companies involved. There are banks, government officials, even intelligence agencies. Jack nodded, studying a particularly revealing document. And Gabriel wasn't the mastermind behind it all, just another pawn in a much bigger game. The information revealed an intricate network of corporate espionage that spanned 3 continents. Tech Vision hadn't been the main target. It was just a piece in a much more complex puzzle. The true architects of the operation were a group of powerful individuals who called themselves the Consortium. Look at this, Sarah called, who had been analyzing a series of encrypted emails. There are messages suggesting Olivia was trying to get out of the organization for months, even before she met you, Jack. Jack approached her screen, reading the messages with growing interest. In them, Olivia expressed concerns about the direction the operations were taking, about ethical lines being crossed. Gabriel's responses were increasingly threatening. She was trapped, Jack murmured, the pieces fitting in his mind. That's why she chose Tech Vision. Not just for the information, but because she knew we had the resources to expose all of this. Are you suggesting she fell in love with you for convenience? Mike asked, skeptical. No, Jack replied, remembering their last encounter in the park. I think that's what complicated her original plan. A particularly encrypted file caught his attention. After several hours of work, they managed to unlock it. It was a detailed record of all of Olivia's operations, including her true identities and the reasons behind each mission. Isabella Martinez, Andrea Torres, Sofia Ruiz. Jack read the names quietly. Each identity had a specific purpose, a carefully constructed story. But Olivia isn't on the list, Sarah noticed. Jack remained thoughtful, because maybe Olivia was real, the only version of herself she allowed herself to show. The sound of a notification interrupted his thoughts. It was an email from an unknown address, specifically directed to Jack. The message was brief. The Consortium knows. Gabriel is on his way to Atlantic City. They have a backup operation there. I can't stop them alone. Toasty Atlantic City, Mike repeated. Why there? Jack began searching through the files until he found what he was looking for, a report on a developing operation in Atlantic City involving several tech companies and an international bank. It's their contingency plan, Jack explained. If one operation fails, they have others in motion, like a backup system. What are you going to do? Mike asked. though by his tone he already knew the answer. "I'm going," Jack replied, starting to gather his things. "But this time, we'll do it differently." Over the next few hours, Jack and his team worked tirelessly, contacting federal authorities, coordinating with security teams, preparing every detail. The information Olivia had provided gave them an advantage they couldn't waste. "The authorities are ready," Mike reported. "They have teams in position in Atlantic City. But Jack, are you sure she's not setting a trap?" Jack looked at the last photo he had of Olivia on his phone, taken during their trip to the Keys. In it, her smile was genuine, with no trace of the professional mask she usually wore. "No," he replied with certainty. "This time she's choosing a side, and she needs to know she's not alone." As he prepared for his trip to Atlantic City, Jack remembered Olivia's words in the park. "Some of us don't have the luxury of redemption." He was determined to prove her wrong. "If this goes wrong," Mike began. "It's not just about tech vision now," Jack interrupted. "It's about doing the right thing, about giving someone the chance to redeem themselves." As the sun set over Miami, Jack looked at his office one last time, aware that when he returned, if he did, nothing would be the same. The final file on Olivia's USB drive had been a letter, dated weeks before their confrontation at the restaurant. "Jack, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to do the right thing. I just hope it's not too late for both of us."